I'm Liam Milan, and in this video we're going to take a look at Ableton Live's Collision device. Collision is an acoustically modelled device based upon a mallet, which is an activator, and then two resonant chambers to be able to amplify and give tone and timbre to the sound. So let's load Collision up. One of the key things with all these acoustic modelling devices within Ableton Live is they're very dynamic, so it helps to try and either play them on a keyboard so you have differences in velocity, or have a MIDI clip that takes or makes use of different velocity values, so you can really make it move around and make the most of the modelling in here. So the starting point we have is our mallet section. The mallet section has its own noise in terms of the noise that's created by the mallet striking the resonator. And then we have the noise section, which is an additional noise that can go on top of the original mallet sound. Then we have the two resonators, an LFO section for modulation, and then a MIDI section, which is where we can assign our own velocity and key range values to these different parts of the acoustic modelling. So let's just load in a couple of presets. By default, it's actually quite a nice sound. It sounds like this. I'm just going to go through a couple of different folders to give you a sense of where this can go. So a lot of range of sounds, generally ones that will work quite well for short sounds, bursts of sounds, but it can be used for longer, interesting, sustained notes, and also more special effects types of sounds as well. So let's start this one off from scratch. Let's load in a new collision and we'll go through the different aspects of this. So let's have a look at the mallet controls. We've got the overall volume of the mallet separate from the volume of the noise, and then we have the stiffness of the mallet itself, the noise volume that comes with the mallet striking the object, and then we also have a frequency of the noise component too. So let's just play around with that and get something that sounds good. So far we got generally a control over the sort of the darkness of the sound when it doesn't have a particularly bright starting point, or we have quite a bright chimey sound as well. And I want this to be fairly dark. So let's just check that again. It's just balancing the body of the sound with that noise as well. The noise section, let's just get a little bit of that on here. We also have a filter for the noise too, so we can restrict where it appears within the full sort of mix, the frequencies. So let's just blend that in to taste. There's a low pass filter on at the moment, so at the moment it's actually filtering a lot of the higher content, so let's pull that up. And then we have a dual purpose envelope for the noise section. So by default, it's controlling the amplitude of the noise. So for instance, if we bring the sustain up, have the release quite long, but pull the volume down. Quite a sort of ethereal ambience aspect to it, or we can tighten it right back up, sustain all the way down, maybe the release quite short, and just use the decay stage to control that spike in amplitude. So I've got it quite filtered. It's filtering off around about 1 kilohertz, so nothing too much in the main mid-range there. It's just emphasizing a bit more energy in those lower frequencies. The dual purpose of the envelope is you can also make the filter move to the shape of the envelope too. So for instance, if I wanted to pull down the static position of the filter, I could use the envelope amount, so this envelope, to apply it to another modulation for the filter position. So in this context, very subtle, but just adding a bit more texture to that initial transient. So the actual nature of these activators, so the mallet and the noise going into what we call the resonator, the resonator is massively imposing a timbre at this point. So we've actually been shaping the mallet in relation to the resonator too. So another way of approaching this would be that you play with the resonator first and then fine tune the activator going into it. We've gone the other way around this time. So let's have a look at the options we have. So remember that the resonator is the sort of the reverberant object, or the object that sympathetically resonates with the actual striking, the activating of the sound. So we have a couple of different main bodies that can be used from sort of classic instruments, so like a string body, a membrane, so like a drum. And also, if you want to create different types of sounds of this, it actually uses the same resonator section as the well-known audio device corpus. So we've got corpus on the end of the activator section in this device. The main difference is by default the actual resonators are responding to pitch of the notes going in, and generally we can make it behave to MIDI a lot easier and have it sort of respond to velocity and so on. So the other reason why I mentioned corpus actually is corpus is a good one for trying to create sort of synthetic or acoustically modelled cymbal sounds, so ride cymbals and hi-hats and so on as well. So the plate is like a metal plate that you can use and create those sorts of sounds. So let's go through these and see, based on what we've done so far, which direction we want this sound to go in. Right, so I'm stuck in a bit of a puzzle here where I really like the pipe or the tube for a really low thump to the sound. So I definitely want one of those, but we do have two resonators. So another thing we can look at is combining that with one of these more melodic parts to let the actual notes ring out. I think marimba. So I'm going to go over to Resonator 2 and turn that one on and choose that pipe option there. So the way that the resonators, sorry, just go back one, I accidentally pressed that button. So the way that the resonators relate to each other can be that Resonator 1 runs into Resonator 2, so the timbre created by 1 is then processed by Resonator 2. Or you can have the activator signals split into 2, and they go equally to Resonator 1 and Resonator 2, so they run in parallel instead. So that would be in parallel, and then that's in series. So I'm not 100% sure which way is going to work best. It might actually work best that I use the thumpy sound in Resonator 1, and then I go for the marimba, wasn't it, in Resonator 2, and I'll just play with what works best. Does it work best that the resonance of the marimba resonator is fed the thumpy sound of the pipe resonator, or is it better that they just run side by side and we hear them combine together? I'm not sure yet, so let's try this out. It's a bit messy, but I think that will work. So the pipe's running into the marimba, wasn't it? Yeah, the marimba resonator. So let's go through some of these main controls that we've got. We've chosen the resonator on this menu here. Now we've got an XY axis dot here which controls these lower controls. Now depending on which resonator you've got, the actual nature of them will be slightly different, but the left one's your decay, so how long it takes for it to sound out. Then the radius is the nature of that decay. If I go to my marimba, the material position on this one is basically the balance of high and low frequencies that we'll get from this sound as it resonates. And in relation to that aspect too, we've got this option here which is called note off, and the whole principle is either the resonator will listen to note off and kind of cut the sound short, or whether it will ignore it and there'll just be a natural decay from the moment the object is struck, so a very natural aspect. If you increase the note off section, if we do it on one that has that option, if you increase it you get more of a gated effect where you get quite an abrupt ending. So for unnatural sound design it's quite useful. So let's just mute Resonator 2 and go for Resonator 1. Play with that radius control. And there we have an opening of the actual pipe at the end as well that we can alter. Which isn't too dissimilar from the sound that we get of this in-harm option, which we'll get to on the marimba, which is basically skewing the harmonic content to either push closer together or be more spread out. And either way, it just gives it a lot more character. So let's just make sure this is sounding right. So play with this decay again. It might be that this one actually sounds better higher up, so I'm going to just punch in on the tune section 12 semitones up. And let's go to Resonator 2 and turn that one on, and let's play with the settings of that. Now the tuning's a bit off in this case, which is great if you want something that sounds quite haunting and sinister. I actually want these two resonators to be a little bit more in keeping with each other. So I can fine tune rather than semitones tune one resonator separately from the other. So let's try that out. And it sounds a little bit like the marimba's sharper than the pipe. So let's pull that down. Okay, that's much better. Let's try the material, as I mentioned earlier, is about the balance of frequencies that we're going to get, and then the decay is going to be the actual time that it takes for it to sound out. Okay, so the last part of the main options we have here is this position L and position R, and that's basically the pickup points that we have on the resonator object. If they're in there, can't remember what the exact value is. I think it's the highest point. It's either going to be at the very extreme side, so we get a very wide signal because it's picking up from different parts of the object, or we can have them more towards the center and have something that's less stereo in nature. So if we go over to here, let's just see sort of what sense of width we have and how wide we do want it. We don't necessarily want it its full potential width. Okay, so the final part is this hit and random aspect. So the hit aspect is, we talked about the object itself, the resonator. We've talked about the type of object that it is, and then we've talked about the nature of where it's getting picked up on the left and the right with this pos L and pos R control. Next, where are we going to hit it? Where's the mallet going to actually go? So we can change that position using the hit control. And do we want it natural? I mean, there's only robots that can hit a xylophone in exactly the same spot for exactly the same strike each time. So we can choose some randomness to this to make it a bit more humanized in how it sounds. So I'm going to play around with that position I'm going to hit the object in, and then play around with how randomized around that position it might go. As I mentioned, there's the inharmonic option, which bunches the harmonics in different directions, closer or further apart. So let's play with that and see how that affects the tone, and if I need to, I'll go back to the tune section and recalibrate the tuning so it sits well with the resonator that's beforehand, which is that pipe. Okay, so that's sounding nice. I like that. So let's go through the last few tabs before we finish up on this sort of introduction to the device. So we have an LFO section, and it's a simple option of finding what you want to actually modulate with the LFO and adding that in here. And then we have a MIDI section, which I mentioned earlier, which is about being able to actually assign either key range or velocity values to certain things. So if we look back to if we maybe go for decay on Resonator 2 is a thing that when we strike it harder, it might sound out for longer. That would be a good assignment of the MIDI data. So Resonator 2, decay, and then just start turning it up for the velocity modulation. So I'll start at 0 and I'll turn it up as we're listening to it. And let's just find something else. Maybe that inharmonic option that we went for Resonator 2 had a lot of impact on the tonality. So maybe just a tiny bit of velocity to vary that as well. Okay, so if you remember in the MIDI clip, various different velocity values, they're now modulating our Resonator 2 decay and Resonator 2's inharmonic as well. So another way to understand these a little bit more is you can look at the presets and reverse engineer the assignments to some degree to figure out what might go towards creating a certain type of sound. But when we're designing sounds, it's more, let's establish a sound that we like as a static setting, and then how can we make that push and pull a little bit away from that position to create more variation and again, interest and depth of sound too. So the final thing to just mention is the voices section. We talked about the actual routing of the resonators. We've got a global volume here. We can have a monophonic behavior. So if, for instance, this will probably sound quite different because it's got a lot of decay between different pitches. If we set it to monophonic, each note is being robbed when the next note comes in. And if we go for higher voice numbers, there's more overlap of previous voices still timing out while the new voice plays. So, retrigger is the last thing to look at there. And retrigger is the option to be able to have, if the same note struck again and again, is like a monophonic behavior for that one musical pitch. When the next note is played, when it's in retrigger, it won't overlap the previous notes that's still maybe playing a sound. It will start afresh and cancel the previous note that was struck as well. So it's one, it'll sound different, but secondly, it's quite good for conserving power for your resources too, because the acoustic modeling can be quite resource hungry. So in this video, we've looked at Ableton Live's collision device, talked about acoustic modeling and collision, how it works in terms of activator to the two resonator chambers. And then we've looked at various ways of being able to alter the properties of the sound and also modify their properties using MIDI assignments.